Welcome to a sleepy journey. But not a boring one. Tonight, we'll turn the pages of the tumultuous history of the Ashkenazi Jews, a people burdened by exile, ingenuity, and the strange, paradoxical peace that can be found in surviving what others deem impossible. Now breathe in slowly, and as the world around you fades, you are no longer lying in your bed, not really. You are walking through the cool fog curling above the Rhine, sometime around the year 1000. You wear a threadbare cloak. And your pockets? Mostly empty. You've just arrived here with your family, displaced, not for the first time. Driven from lands to the east, wandering from one suspicious town to the next, your people have finally found a kind of welcome. A German bishop, intrigued by the idea of an industrious minority he can tax at will, has granted you permission to settle. Of course, this permission is not free. You pay a fee for the right to breathe this air. Your children will be counted and taxed. Your aging father will be taxed for the wrinkles around his eyes. Even your future funeral might carry a toll, but, for now, you bow. You smile. You nod, and you stay quiet. The Christians around you see only strangers, bearded men muttering Hebrew, women who cover their hair, children who sing in strange tongues. You settle into a neighborhood near the edge of town. You begin again. They won't let you own land. You're barred from the carpenters' guild, the smiths, the butchers, the tanners. You cannot farm, cannot join the town council, cannot even bring a legal case in Christian courts unless you have a priest to swear by your honesty. Which you don't, so you look inward. You look to each other. And slowly, something begins to bloom, not a rebellion, no, just a quiet, clever system of survival. One neighbor starts baking challah and selling it on Fridays, slipping a few extra coins under the table to avoid scrutiny. Another opens a school in her attic, not just to teach children Torah, but to teach them numbers. And caution. You learn to listen more than you speak. You learn to fold into shadows and avoid the curious gaze of guards who wonder. Always, whether you're hiding something, and maybe, you begin to notice the patterns in the taxes. At first, it seems random, 1 month a flat fee, the next a levy on luxuries like candlesticks or dyed fabric. But your cousin begins to track them. He keeps notes tucked inside his prayer book, and soon, it becomes clear, if you move quickly and quietly, if you stay ahead of the census taker's quill, you might just outsmart the ledger. The town's leaders think they've found a steady stream of gold, but you've seen this before. You've watched cities invite Jews in for profit, only to turn on them in famine or plague or war. So you never unpack completely. Your home is cozy. But your bags are near the door. Your records are encoded. Your stories are layered with allegory, and when they start taxing children under 2, you decide your youngest was stillborn. A lie that leaves a sour taste. But keeps bread on the table. You go to synagogue, you say your prayers, you light candles for Shabbat, but more and more, your rituals carry a second meaning: protection. Camouflage. Delay. The bishop builds a new toll gate, and suddenly the price of visiting a cousin in the next town triples. So you invent a reason to bring them to you instead. A wedding. A funeral. A birth. Even if the child has already turned 3, tax collectors knock on your door, asking how many live in the house. You answer honestly. Just me and my wife. You don't mention the cellar. Or the attic. Your community begins to grow, not just in size, but in strategy. Whispered tips. Secret notes. The rabbi gives long-winded sermons that, if listened to carefully, suggest certain loopholes. You learn to read between the lines, even when the lines are divine. In time, you begin to see taxes not as a curse, but as a language. A puzzle. A riddle designed by people who do not understand how deeply you've learned to survive, and so, you speak it fluently. Not out of greed. Not for rebellion. But because you've seen too much to believe the rules were ever made for you in the first place. The winds shift. A new lord replaces the bishop. He's less interested in your beliefs, more interested in your coins. So you pay, yes, but you also start to notice, he never counts the goats. Only the silver. So your savings become livestock, and you trade with neighbors who understand the code. Your daughter is married off with a dowry that's recorded as a modest gift. But the parchment she carries with her hides numbers that no Christian eyes will ever see. You are careful. But not fearful, because the truth is, you are tired of fleeing. Tired of starting over. And somewhere, between exile and exhaustion, a quiet brilliance is born, a kind of genius that isn't loud, doesn't shout, but simply survives. You teach it to your children. You bake it into your bread. You sew it into your sleeves, and you wait, because if history has taught you anything, it's that the taxes will rise again. The rules will change again. The neighbors will turn again. And when they do, you will already be halfway gone, or hidden in plain sight, with a wink, and a ledger that says only what you want it to. You rise before dawn. The shutters stay drawn. The streets outside glimmer faintly with dew, but you won't be stepping into the market square just yet, not unless you're prepared for the stairs, the carpenter's tools. Not for your hands, the potter's kiln. Not your fire, the fabric stalls, the wheat trade, the guilds of leather and wine. All closed doors. Locked tight. Not by accident, but by design. They say you're not allowed to join the guilds because you don't follow their saints, their feast days, their customs. But you know better. It's not about saints. It's about fear. Fear that you'll work harder, charge less, learn faster. That you'll be good enough to compete, so they keep you out. And so, again, you adapt. One neighbor starts buying discarded wool scraps, leftovers that no proper Christian merchant would touch, and spins them into thread. She sells it to a cousin, who uses it to patch robes. The robes aren't perfect, but they last another season. It's not a trade guild. It's not a storefront. It's not even visible. But it works. You become a master of quiet enterprise. Another neighbor reads letters for illiterate merchants. They pay in kind, sacks of barley, a duck, once even a pair of boots that don't quite fit. He calls it favors. The merchants call it luck. You call it survival. You can't sell at the official stalls, but you can whisper deals between alleyways. A spool of thread here, a warm roll of cheesecloth there. Always indirect. Always careful, the taxes keep coming, of course. Not just in coins, but in permissions. You must pay to bake bread in a communal oven. Pay to draw water from the town well. Pay, even, to bury your dead, and so, the real work begins, not with hammer and chisel, but with thought. With calculation. With memory. Your cousin, Rivka, starts keeping track of who is being taxed for what. She notices that single women are taxed differently than married ones, especially when it comes to the size of their homes. So suddenly, more women are widows. Or engaged. Never quite married. Never quite alone, one by one. Your community maps the invisible rules, finds the soft spots, and presses gently against them. You learn when to hide your silver, when to invent a cousin, when to forget your real name and borrow another. They say you're dishonest. They say you twist the law. But you know the truth, the law was never written with your survival in mind. It was written to hold you in place. And your answer is not defiance, it's evasion. Graceful, precise evasion. You become a student of silence. Of delay. Of the slow, careful no that sounds like a yes if you tilt your head just right. The rabbi begins teaching not just Torah, but contracts. Loan terms. Land use. Oaths. He shows the boys how to count not just by sevens, but in increments that match the local tax code. He teaches the girls the same, though no one outside the walls must know. A clever girl is an unspoken asset, especially when no one sees her coming. You practice writing 2 versions of every transaction, one for yourself, one for the taxman. In the official one, you sold a single goat. In the real one, you sold 3 and bartered for a winter coat, you learned to keep paper dry in a damp basement, and to erase Hebrew in a single smooth scrape of the parchment blade. Even the synagogue becomes part of the strategy. One alcove hides ledgers. Another masks a narrow passage, leading not to safety exactly, but to time. Time to disappear if things turn again. And they will. History teaches that, still, you find comfort in structure. In the way your community builds not just escape plans, but dignity. You begin to see yourself not as banned from everything, but as liberated from their system. You're not waiting to be accepted. You're creating a parallel life. You dress plainly, but your inner seams are double-stitched. You pay the tithe, but with coins passed through 3 hands and 1 story. You offer respect, but never too much, never too fast. There is beauty here, too. A kind of beauty born of constraint. Like a melody composed with only 5 notes, or a dance within the smallest circle of light. You make it work. You make it yours. And slowly, the Christians begin to notice, not the tricks, but the calm. The way you manage. The way you endure. They start to come to you with problems. Can you hold this money for me, just until after the census? Can your cousin loan me something, just for a week? You're good with numbers, aren't you? They think they're using you. But you smile. Because you've already calculated the risk, they see you as a banker. A scribe. A middleman. They never quite see the whole of you, and that is your greatest strength. The room smells faintly of wax and ink. You sit behind a table made from reclaimed barn wood, its legs uneven, one shimmed with a folded scrap of prayer scroll long worn thin. A single candle flickers. Across from you, a man in fine boots clears his throat. He looks uncomfortable, not because of the cramped space, or your presence, but because of what he's about to ask. He needs money. Fast. For a toll, for a shipment, for a favor owed to someone with sharper teeth than you, and you have money, not much. Not by the standards of kings or bishops. But enough to lend. Enough to be noticed. You ask the right questions. You write the loan on parchment. You sign in Hebrew. He signs with an X. He shifts in his seat. He doesn't want to be seen here. Not because you're dangerous, but because being helped by someone like you means he owes something. Not just coin. But a debt to the outsider. You hand him the silver, measured out by weight. You don't smile. You don't frown. You remain quiet. Moneylending is not a choice. It's a survival role. A doorway left open when all others were slammed shut. Christians are forbidden by the church to lend with interest, so the work falls to you. Some call it sin. You call it necessity. You lend carefully, always with contracts, always with records. You know what happens when the wind shifts and a debtor becomes your accuser. The town counts on you. Even as it whispers against you, they need loans for tools, for marriage dowries, for trade caravans. They pay interest, and sometimes they resent it. Sometimes they forget that they came to you. That you didn't twist their arm. That without your silver, their barns would be empty, so you keep records, meticulous, hidden, coded. Names, dates, debts repaid or forgotten. You know that power built on money is always shaky. So you stay small. Not poor, but discreet. Sometimes, you forgive a loan entirely. Not out of mercy, but out of wisdom. A forgiven debt is worth more than a bitter one. A favor is currency in a different language. And unlike coins, favors aren't taxed. Your children learn the signs. A wealthy borrower who arrives on foot is likely lying. A poor one who repays in full without prompting is someone to protect. A widow comes to you with trembling hands. She's afraid. Her husband left behind nothing but unpaid tolls and 2 children. She doesn't want to borrow. She just wants to understand what will happen next. You explain gently. You write a letter for her, offering to defer the fees. When she leaves, your daughter asks if that was charity. You shake your head. No. That was investment. because in a time of famine, that woman will bake 2 loaves and bring you 1. When the soldiers search for silver, she'll be the first to whisper which houses they've marked. You've begun to understand that money is not the end, it's the language of trust, of leverage, of movement, but it also paints a target on your back. A lord finds himself deep in debt and wonders aloud why so many Christians owe coin to Jews. A bishop preaches that the community's poverty is your fault. The townspeople listen. They forget that their carts, their tools, their dowries, their fences, were all built from loans accepted freely, and so rumors begin. You see the shift before it happens, you move ledgers to safer places, you spread loans among more borrowers, you let some debts die silently, and then, when a town nearby turns violent, when homes are raided and synagogues burned, you're already gone. Your family disappears into the fog. The house is empty. The records? Ashes or air, but not all towns burn. Some, oddly, protect. Because despite resentment, your work is woven too deep. Remove you, and the cloth unravels, and so, over time, you become both feared and needed, a tightrope walker with no net, a lifeline, wrapped in suspicion, a lender of last resort, and first resort too, and always, always. Taxed, they tax your profits. Then they tax your right to make them. Then they tax your refusal to leave. Sometimes, you pay in coin, sometimes, in clever math, sometimes, in silence, but always, you endure, not because you want to be rich, but because every coin, every favor, every forgiven loan, buys you another day, another week, another season of safety, and in that safety, your children learn, your customs deepen, your people survive, not as saints, not as villains, but as something far more remarkable, a community made of calculation, compassion, and cunning. It begins with a whisper, a new decree, a royal order. A fee added not for goods, not for services, but for presence. You are now taxed simply for existing. They call it a head tax, a poll tax, a Judensteuer. It arrives like a seasonal storm, unwelcome, arbitrary, and entirely out of your control. 1 coin per head, per month, per year, depending on the mood of the collector. Children, elders, the sick, the unborn, no one escapes the counting. You gather with others in the dim back room of the synagogue. You unfold the decree. You stare at the numbers. And you calculate, not just what they're taking, but what they mean to take. It's not only money. It's submission. It's obedience disguised as arithmetic. They count you because they can. And so, you start to uncount yourselves. One by one, your neighbors begin to vanish, on paper, at least. Old widows who live in attics stop appearing in the lists. Infants are never declared. Husbands are away on trade, even when they're not. Every soul erased from a tax roll is 1 less coin, 1 less burden. It's not dishonesty. It's defense. You assign guardianship cleverly. 1 household now absorbs another, just for the sake of fewer taxable units. A family of 7 becomes 3. An orphan is adopted temporarily to simplify the math. You get very good at subtraction. Some communities pool their resources and pay the tax collectively. It's easier to hide who's truly present that way. It turns the census into a negotiation instead of an inquisition, and when the collectors come, dressed in fine robes and armored assumptions, you greet them with courtesy and confusion. 3 people live here, you say. They count 4 beds, you shrug. We take in travelers. They ask where your father is. You point to the cemetery. They ask if your cousin still resides with you. You say no, and mean it. He moved to the cellar. They try to cross-reference. But your names shift subtly. A Yitzhak becomes an Isaac. A Miriam becomes a Merle. The spelling varies. The handwriting is unclear. It buys time. You teach your children to say the wrong age, to shave off a year. Add 1, depending on what lowers the toll. A 10-year-old becomes 8 if it saves a coin. A grown boy claims to be 13, so he counts as an adult and not a burden. And all of it happens quietly. Without argument. Without resistance. You do not protest in the streets. You do not gather in mobs. You simply step sideways, barely enough to notice. The authorities find themselves chasing ghosts. One bishop's clerk writes angrily that the Jewish population is slippery as eels. He meant it as an insult. You take it as a compliment. Some cities try to pin you down with more brutal tactics. Physical tags. Colored badges. Specific hats. Anything to mark and monitor. But even these efforts fade with time. Worn away by the shifting politics of princes, the chaos of wars, the limitations of memory, you survive by being forgettable, you thrive by being misunderstood, and yet, in private, you keep precise records, for yourselves. Births, deaths, marriages. But written in Hebrew, stored in sacred cabinets, disguised as prayer books if needed, to the outside world, your community appears smaller than it is. Quieter. Poorer, but inside the walls, it hums with life. You learn to withhold not just your coins, but your joy. You celebrate discreetly. A wedding feast becomes a quiet meal. A birth is marked with whispers and lullabies. You do not attract attention. You do not tempt new decrees. Still, the taxman always returns, and so, you adapt again. You begin to disguise your wealth, not in lies, but in form. You invest in knowledge, not goods. In favors, not property. In memory, not monuments, because memory is hard to tax, and no one can seize what they cannot see. You make sure the richest man in the quarter lives in the plainest house. You ensure the best cooks wear the simplest aprons. You pass down jewels not as heirlooms, but as marriage bonds, small enough to hide, significant enough to matter. You teach your children that safety lies not in hiding completely, but in seeming unremarkable. You remind them that paying too much draws attention. That paying too little invites suspicion. That the art of survival lies in balance, between visibility and invisibility, and still, you breathe. Despite the toll. Despite the counting, you breathe in candlelight and braided bread. You breathe in stories, told over soup, whispered between pages of Gemara. You breathe in the sound of Yiddish in a crowded room, of children reciting letters by oil lamp. They may charge you for the air in your lungs. But they cannot own the breath itself, and as night falls, as the tax collectors return to their estates and declare your community accounted for, you smile, because behind every number on their scrolls is a secret you've chosen to keep, and every coin they collect is one you've already accounted for, twice. You are taxed for breathing, and yet you are still here. You sit at the edge of a modest wedding feast, bread, not wine, stew, not roast. The bride is smiling, nervously twisting her ring. The groom is younger than he looks, older than he feels. But tonight is not just about love or family. It's about numbers. Protection. Disappearance. The dowry sits in a cloth bundle under the table. Not flashy. Not new. But heavy. Inside, silver pieces, a small chain, and 3 goats, on paper, at least. The animals are a fiction. Or perhaps a metaphor. Or perhaps they did exist, once, before they walked off into another village's inventory. This is how money vanishes, not by burying it. Not by burning it. But by giving it just enough movement to confuse the pattern. The dowry, you see, is sacred. It belongs to the bride. Untouchable by the state. Often unrecorded. Protected by Jewish law, ignored by Christian taxmen. And so, over time, dowries become hiding places. One neighbor gives his daughter 5 silver coins and 3 jars of preserved honey. She marries. The jars go untouched. 2 months later, she leaves her husband, quietly, amicably. She returns home, dowry intact. The taxman is none the wiser. It's not fraud. It's tradition. In some towns, a child is married young, not to create a household, but to shift assets. The marriage is annulled later, with tears, prayers, and a well-practiced frown. The coin returns home, but on a different ledger. And then there are the names. You become the cousin of a cousin. A widow of a merchant who never existed. A guest staying temporarily. On one census, you're Miriam bat Abraham. On another, Merk bas Avram. The scribe writes what he hears. Or what he thinks he hears. Or what he's paid to write. The variation isn't random. It's mathematical. A single changed letter shifts a tax record enough to escape the formula. Sometimes, you are counted twice. Sometimes not at all. Your son appears as Moises in one town, Mosche in another, and Marcus in a third. He never leaves home. In one ledger, you own a cow. In another, a goat. In reality, neither. But both are tied up in someone else's barn. Just until the auditors finish their rounds, the goats graze in fields just outside the walls, tended by a farmer who owes you a favor. He doesn't mention the arrangement. Neither do you. The animals are his for now, but tomorrow, they might be yours again. This is not chaos. It's choreography. Everyone knows the steps. Everyone understands the silences. You pass coins through hands like water through fingers. You divide your wealth among many names, many walls, many stories. A scholar teaches his students to read Torah by candlelight, and also how to write receipts that are true, but selectively so. This, he says, is the signature of a man who owns land. This, he adds, holding a nearly identical mark, is the same man, but without land. Notice the difference? The taxman won't. You all learn to speak two languages, not Hebrew and German. Not Yiddish and Latin, but truth and necessary fiction. There's a kind of poetry in it, the way a single coin might fund a burial, a loan, and a dowry, depending on who asks and when, the way one family can live in 3 houses, or 3 families in one, depending on what the census demands, the way a goat can be both here and not here, alive, dead, borrowed, or remembered. You don't lie. You edit, you don't steal. You rearrange, and always, there's the ledger. Not the official one, but the hidden one. Passed between elders. Updated after sunset. Written in abbreviations and flourishes. Stored beneath floorboards, behind loose stones, inside hollowed-out books. Sometimes, the book is a commentary on Exodus. Sometimes, it is Exodus itself. You learn that survival is not about strength. It's about nimbleness. About knowing how to step into the shadows, not out of fear, but by design. Even your festivals shift. A wedding moves by 2 days, coincidentally avoiding a new tax on public gatherings. A circumcision is delayed, not for the child's health, but because a census official is in town. Coincidence is a kind of armor. You use every loophole, every sacred clause, every silent space between the laws of empires and the laws of survival. And when the authorities accuse your people of manipulation, of concealment, of cleverness, what they truly mean is this: you've made their rules into your tools, and with them, you disappear, gracefully, partially, just enough to survive. The candlelight flickers across the scroll. Your rabbi leans close, brow furrowed. He's not looking for comfort. He's looking for something sharper, a justification. The room is quiet except for the rustle of vellum and the gentle sigh of the pages being turned. One boy snores softly in the corner, head resting on a worn prayer book. But no one wakes him. This is not a matter of urgency. It's a matter of precision. You're searching for a sacred exit. Because the tax decree is clear, Jews must surrender 10% of all household income, property, livestock, and silver reserves. But what is income? What counts as livestock? What, in the eyes of God and bureaucracy alike, is truly yours? This is where footnotes become weapons. A medieval rabbi from Speyer once ruled that if a coin is pledged for tzedakah, charity, even privately, it no longer belongs to you. So you assign coins to future charity. Not yet donated. But promised. Intention, you argue, transforms ownership. The taxman doesn't understand Hebrew intent. You do. Another ruling suggests that property entrusted to a communal treasury is not taxable to the individual. So, for a month, your brother donates his silver ring to the synagogue's fund. The week after inspection, the ring comes home, no one lies. But truths are rearranged. There is a long debate about whether debt owed to you counts as taxable wealth. The scrolls are unclear. One verse says no. Another implies yes. A third, written in the margin by a scholar 2 generations ago, suggests only if it's likely to be repaid. So you lend selectively. Generously. Especially when repayment is uncertain, coins given to a cousin struggling in Mainz? Not taxable. Coins lent to a merchant whose caravan vanished near Regensburg? Also not taxable. And coins owed by a widow with 6 children? You mark them as forgiven. With a quiet blessing, the world outside accuses you of loopholes. You call it halacha, the winding path through obligation and meaning. Your legal minds become as valuable as your doctors, as respected as your scribes. Not because they defy the law, but because they understand how to thread it, sew it, shape it into something that breathes. In one town, a scholar notices that tax records only include those who reside permanently. So, on paper, your community becomes a network of temporary residents. Every family is just passing through. Year after year. The same faces, the same houses. But always. Just visiting, you write contracts of temporary presence. They are witnessed. Signed, notarized. They are real, at least in intent. And so, the tax does not apply. Elsewhere, someone questions whether a woman's jewelry counts toward household wealth. A ruling from the Rhineland states, that which is worn, not stored, is part of the person. So your wives wear their silver. Your daughters wear the family's future dowries on their wrists. A festival becomes a fashion show, every chain, every brooch, every hidden clasp serving dual purposes, even cooking pots become contested ground. A decree demands a tally of household metal. You point out, sweetly, that according to halacha, a pot used exclusively for Passover cannot be considered ordinary property. It is sacred. Occasional. Not taxable. The scribe blinks, unfamiliar with religious cookware. He shrugs. He writes 0. You smile. The truth is, you study the tax codes as closely as you study the Torah. You mark the margins, you analyze precedent, you create interpretations, arguments, counter-arguments, and when one ruling is overturned, you don't panic. You adapt. You learn that every royal decree has a lag, between writing and enforcement, between intent and reality. In that space, you live. In the cracks of certainty, you breathe. A boy once asked his grandfather why he studies Talmud so late into the night, because, the old man said, someday a question will come wrapped in chains. And I want to know which thread to pull. The chains have arrived, and you? You are ready. You walk the fine line between compliance and resistance. Not with swords. But with scrolls. Not with defiance. But with deliberation. Your faith is not just ritual. It is legal acrobatics. Your rabbis are not just teachers. They are architects of ambiguity. Every law contains within it a shadow, and in that shadow, you build your life. There's only one of you. But in the tax books, you are 3. The first version is Menachem bar Yosef, honest merchant, modest earnings, 1 daughter, no servants. The second is Mendel ben Joseph, laborer, unmarried, nothing to declare. The third? Mani, simply of the Jewish quarter, tax-exempt this year thanks to illness. Or perhaps conscription. Or perhaps widowhood. The explanation shifts like morning fog. All 3 exist, all 3 are you, because the scribes never compare notes, because the handwriting is inconsistent, because the spellings bend with each border, and you have learned to bend with them. You weren't born deceptive. You were taught, by necessity, by survival. By quiet observations made behind shutters and beyond curfews. You listened as names were shortened, softened, hidden. When the authorities started taxing anyone with land, your cousin became a tenant of your neighbor. On paper, anyway, when livestock were counted and taxed, your uncle's goat became your brother's wedding gift, temporary, of course. It bleated in the same stall, chewed the same straw, but officially? It belonged elsewhere, and when the king demanded that all Jewish adult males register by name and pay an annual fee, 3 boys in your town were named Moshe. Not because it was popular. Because it was repeatable. In one shtetl, Moshe ben Eliyahu was split into 2. The son registered in the spring. The father in the fall. The taxman, overworked and underinformed, recorded both, and charged both less than he would have for a single full household, a clever glitch. A shared wink. A new tradition, some families began giving children double names with slight variants. Isaac became Isaac, Itzik, Isaac, depending on the scribe, the season, the city. It made tracing difficult. It made double charging tricky. The most gifted among you could manage entire mirrored lives. Your neighbor Shlomo, for example, lived under 4 names. He rotated them between communities like worn cloaks. In one, he was a poor relative visiting his sister. In another, a teacher earning nothing but bread and shelter. In a third, a sickly dependent. And in the last, a widower exempt for the year out of mourning. Each version of Shlomo paid something. But none paid enough to be noticed. It's not fraud, you tell yourself. It's fragmentation. Protection through dispersion. If the world insists on punishing your wholeness, you give them only fragments, you become a patchwork. A mosaic of plausible shadows. Even your professions change depending on the angle. To the collector from the bishop's office, you're a scribe, barely profitable. To the market officials, a broker of used cloth. To your neighbors, a teacher of Talmud and taxes. Each version of you is true. Just not entirely. Your wife is listed as childless in one quarter. In another, she's noted as the mother of twins. The tax clerk doesn't see the error because he never asks her. He only reads what the last clerk wrote. You preserve the illusion. You make it plausible. And you move on. Sometimes, you hide by multiplying, other times, by merging. When taxes rise on households with multiple adults, 3 single men in your community combine into one family. They live together. They share a name. Temporarily. For the purposes of the registry, 1 year later, they quietly separate, each taking a corner of the city and a version of the name. No questions are asked. No suspicion raised. Because the names are familiar. And familiarity dulls scrutiny. You learn to love the clerical error, a missing dot above a letter? A smudged line? A reversal of first and last. To others, it's incompetence. To you, it's camouflage. The tax rolls are written quickly. Carelessly. Underpaid scribes make silent allies. Their errors are your shield, and always, always, you teach your children, be many things. Be many names. But never let them pin you to one. So you become fluid, not dishonest. Just uncatchable. You are 3 Moshes, 2 Sarahs, for surnames deep. You are both borrower and lender. Tenant and guest. Uncle and employer. A bureaucrat may look you in the eye and swear they've seen you before. They have, but they'll never be sure where. They come for you at dawn, not with swords drawn, but with ledgers open, not a raid. An audit, the kind that asks more questions than it answers. You're ready, not because you've prepared speeches or bribes, but because you've prepared to disappear. Your bags were never fully unpacked anyway. Your wealth, such as it is, was never in one place. And your name? It's already fading from the books. The taxmen knock, and your house stands empty. It's not magic. It's timing. The fire was banked before you left. The goats released toward a neighbor's pasture. The key left in the old stone wall, just in case someone friendly comes later. Your footprints vanish in morning fog. Your story becomes a puzzle the officials don't care enough to solve. One cart breaks a wheel on the road to the next village. A child cries. A song is hummed to soothe him. And by the time a soldier asks who you are, your name is different. Your papers slightly burned. Your accent just unfamiliar enough. The art of leaving quietly is not about stealth. It's about normalcy. The less dramatic your departure, the harder it is to trace, and so you vanish midweek. Not on a festival, not on a Sabbath. You leave behind stale bread and worn shoes, suggesting poverty, suggesting you weren't worth following. Your community scatters like dandelion seeds in wind. Each family heading in a slightly different direction, just far enough that no two are caught together. And still, there are messages, written in Hebrew shorthand, hidden inside cloth linings or tucked beneath dried fish in market baskets. You'll know where to meet again. Maybe in Worms. Maybe in Prague. Maybe in Krakow. There is always another village, always another quarter of a city willing to look the other way for a skilled weaver, a clever lender, a good teacher. Sometimes you leave letters. Sometimes only silence. The house remains, locked, dusty, filled with echoes. And when the king's men arrive, they find nothing. A single cracked plate. A window ajar. No names. No silver. Just emptiness that feels intentional. In the ghettos of Speyer, Mainz, and Cologne, the rhythm becomes ritual. When rumors of a new tax surface, elders begin lending furniture across alleys. When a census is announced, families swap children for a week. When soldiers pass through, the synagogue turns dark early, and prayers are whispered instead of sung. And when it's time, when the lists grow too long and the questions too pointed, everyone already knows. The exits have been practiced. The carts are half-loaded. You walk out before the story finishes writing itself. One of your cousins once said, "Better to be forgotten than to be counted." And so you live by that. You make yourself forgettable. Mild, unimpressive, you wear plain clothes. Speak softly. Trade quietly, and when someone asks where you're from, you smile vaguely. East, you say. Or from the hills. Never a town. Never a name. Your life becomes a notebook written in fading ink, legible only to those who know where to look, and when you settle again, you do so lightly. You carry more scrolls than plates. More memories than belongings. You plant your feet, but not too deeply, because you know, the wind may rise again, not because of anything you did, but because empires shift. Kings die. Ministers hunger for gold. And when they do, you'll be counted again. Taxed again. Blamed again, so you keep your map folded. You keep your bundle ready, and you teach your children not how to fight, but how to vanish with grace. Not into nothingness, but into somewhere new. You have no army, no castle, no garrison, no banner, but you have time, and unlike kings, you treat it as sacred. The seventh day arrives, and the world slows. Not because it chooses to, but because you do. From sunset to sunset, your shop closes, your books close, your eyes close, sometimes not in sleep, but in stillness. The Sabbath is a fortress without walls. No trade. No travel. No counting of coins, and the taxman hates it, because he doesn't understand why your market stall is shut when he visits. Why you refuse to ink your name on a scroll. Why, when asked for your ledgers on a Saturday, you only smile and whisper, "Tomorrow." There are no weapons sharper than polite delay. You don't deny. You defer. You don't argue. You simply wait until the stars reappear. And by then, the clerk is gone, or distracted, or reassigned to a different district. But you don't stop at Sabbath. Your calendar is a web of holy time, while the Christian world moves in solar certainty. January to December, Sunday to Sunday, you follow the moon. Months swell and shrink. Days float. Feasts fall on Tuesdays or Thursdays or not at all. Your holy days are invisible to outsiders, which means taxes due on the 15th often miss your Purim, your Sukkot, your Shavuot. You can't pay on a day of rest. And the next day, the scribe forgets. Or the road floods. Or your goat is sick. Or you're already gone. You become a master of divine scheduling. One decree requires families to present livestock for counting on a set spring day. That week, you're in mourning. Not for a death, though who's to question it? You sit wrapped in grief, and no one dares interrupt. A tithe is demanded during harvest. You harvest early. Or late. Or switch crops entirely. Wheat becomes barley. Barley becomes ritual use only. What's taxable? Only what's measurable. And what's measurable? Only what fits the calendar. You bake time into your resistance. A week before the king's agent arrives, you declare a communal fast. Not because of taxes, but because someone had a vision, a troubling dream. A bad omen. For 24 hours, the town doesn't eat. Doesn't speak. Doesn't answer doors. The agent shrinks away, uneasy. Religious silence is a language no sword can argue with. Then there are leap months, years when your calendar adds a whole extra moon cycle. The Christians don't know this. You nod politely as they count your missing payments. You insist it's not time yet. You bring out scrolls. You offer blessings. You confuse, respectfully. Your Torah becomes a tax manual, your prayers, a postponement, your rituals, a loophole large enough to walk through with your family, your books, and your goat, and still, you do not lie, you honor time. That is your shield. You gather for Rosh Hashanah with ledgers tucked behind candlelight. You sing for Yom Kippur knowing full well a census looms. You carry palm fronds and citrus not just in celebration, but as signals, we are still here. And we are on our own schedule. One child asks you why it matters, why the moons and sunsets and odd feast days still rule you, and you tell her, because empires rise and fall on the Gregorian calendar. But we live in God's time. And God doesn't pay taxes. She laughs, she learns, and one day, she'll answer the door on a Friday night with a candle in hand and say, "Not now. You'll have to come back." The candle will flicker. The official will hesitate, and you'll be one more day deeper into freedom. You light no candles this Friday. You hum no blessings, wear no fringes, speak no Hebrew, not here. Not now. Not under these eyes, because this week, in this town, in this fragile moment, you are no longer a Jew, you are now Christian, at least on parchment, at least for the tax records. You don't call it betrayal. You call it survival, because conversion, in your world, is sometimes not a change of heart but a change of category. A legal maneuver. A bureaucratic vanishing act performed beneath the shadow of the cross, and the taxman steps aside, you disappear from the list. The Jewish levy no longer applies. The head count shrinks. A rabbi's ledger quietly adjusts. You walk into the church on Sunday with your head bowed. Your voice low, and your questions pre-planned. Where do I sit? How much do I owe? What's the priest's name again? You're not the first to do this, not even the first in your family. Your cousin Moshe became Matteo in Venice. His name changed, his accent softened. His beard trimmed, but he still baked matzah in secret. Still whispered Shema into his pillow. Still taught his children Hebrew, disguised as ancient poetry. In Prague, a man named Jacob took baptism and vanished from tax rolls, only to return 3 years later under a new name, rejoining his community with a story of long illness and recovered faith. Some conversions were shallow, a few were sincere, most were muddy in between. You knew a widow who converted to marry a Gentile merchant, escaping her debts, then reappearing years later with a false will and 3 grown children who knew how to hide. There were risks, of course. Fake faith could bring real flames. Apostasy was a crime in both directions. You could be exiled by Jews, executed by Christians. You could find yourself unwanted on either side of the line, but even that line, like names, calendars, and cities, could be bent. You learn to exist in the in-between, a man who bows in the cathedral but prays in the attic, a woman baptized with wine, but buried with stones upon her grave, a child taught to cross himself at school and light Sabbath candles at home. Told only to pick one when he grows old enough to understand why it mattered. Sometimes, the whole community helps. A ghetto whispers, "We don't speak of him." Then, 2 years later, whispers, "He's back." Sometimes your conversion is public. A performance of repentance, complete with new clothes and a Latin name. Other times, it's only a check mark in a dusty book, written by a clerk who's glad to see one fewer Jew on the list. You still fast on Yom Kippur. You just call it illness. You still bury your dead in the old way. You just say the priest refused to come. You become a dual citizen of belief, not because you lack faith, but because you must protect it, to outsiders. It looks like cowardice, to insiders, it's chess. Every pawn you move buys time. Every mask you wear spares someone else the tax, the fine, the burning. Sometimes you return to your name, sometimes you never do, but either way, the ledger forgets. And forgetting is freedom, so you teach your children to read the signs, to watch the lists, to know that faith lives in the quietest corners, beneath boards, behind curtains, within breath, and when they ask why you ever changed your name, your God, your whole world, you say only, to protect yours. The ink dries on the royal decree. Your name, is written next to a title you never asked for, appointed collector of Jewish dues. It's not irony. It's strategy, because who better to extract taxes from your own people than someone who understands the margins? Who speaks the language of both Torah and tally marks? Who knows which widow truly cannot pay and which merchant is quietly gilding his shutters? You never wanted this, but refusing wasn't safe either, so now you collect, not for greed. Not for power. But because someone had to do it. And if it must be done, better by someone who remembers the price of exile, you hold 2 ledgers, one for the crown. Meticulous. Measured, a work of fiction carefully edited, the other, your own, written in pencil, tucked in cloth, full of footnotes only you understand. You underreport when you can, you mishear numbers, you accept payment in goods, in promises, in prayers. The king demands 30 head of tax-paying households, you count 28, 2 are traveling. 1 is sick. 1. Converted. He hasn't, but you know the word buys time. You walk a tightrope, too much resistance, and they replace you with someone crueler, too much compliance, and you betray your kin, so you become a quiet smuggler of mercy. When a mother can't afford the tax on her stall, you mark her as a widow. When a student lacks the coin for study, you list him as unfit. When soldiers pressure you for gold, you bring them copper and say it was all you found, and when they threaten you, you bow. You apologize. You promise to do better, then you go home, tear the page, and start again. The community sees you differently now. Some whisper that you've sold out. That you've grown too close to the crown. That your new coat is too fine, but others know. The old ones. The ones who remember what happened the last time the collector was not one of their own, they leave gifts on your doorstep. Bread. Candles. A new quill, a note, for the things you do not write down. You grow weary. Of pretending. Of being the bridge. Of smiling at men who call you both friend and subject. But you endure, because as long as you hold the pen, you decide what gets passed along, and sometimes, deciding what not to say is the best protection you can offer. In another city, you meet someone like you, a Jewish woman, officially housekeeper to the local magistrate. She arranges his books, she arranges more than that. Between her silent ink and your whisper-thin ledgers, an entire population escapes scrutiny. You call it shadow accounting, she calls it mitzvah. You joke once that if all Jewish tax collectors disappeared, the empire would collapse under its own confusion. She doesn't laugh. She just nods, because it's true. You are not just the taxed, you are also the taxing. You don't break the system, you reshape it. Gently. Quietly. Beneath the surface, and when the king's agents boast of their control over your people, they hold documents written in your own handwriting. You wonder if they'll ever notice. Probably not, because for now, the numbers match, and the coin flows, but the soul of the system, that belongs to you, they arrive in pairs, always in pairs. One carries a sword. The other, a scroll. You smile politely, stepping aside so they may enter. Your house smells of bread. The floors are swept. The ledger is already waiting on the table. This is not your first audit, and it won't be your last. They sit. They cough. They adjust their tunics, unused to such silence. One of them has ink stains on his fingers. The other has mud on his boots. Neither notices the subtle weaving in your curtains or the double floorboard beneath the table. You open the book, it's all there, dates, numbers, names that mean everything and nothing. Because what they see is only the outer skin of a story you never intended to tell in full. The meat lies elsewhere. You speak in calm tones. You guide them through the columns. You mention the rainy spring, the bad harvest, the illness that took old Eliyahu. Was that recorded? Ah yes, here. A note. They nod. They pretend to understand. But the more they follow the trail, the more it curls back on itself like a ribbon in the wind. The scribes aren't fools. They know they're being led. But what can they do? The numbers balance, technically. The signatures match. The coins handed over are real, and when the questions get too sharp, you distract. You must be hungry. We don't see many officials this far north. Would you like some warm wine while I find the second ledger? There is no second ledger, or rather, it exists only in parts, a page sewn into a pillow. A number scratched beneath a bowl. A debt remembered only by a child who recites it like a nursery rhyme. You were never taught accounting in a yeshiva, but your people have perfected a kind of spiritual misdirection. What looks like honesty is intelligent opacity. One man audits your synagogue records and finds them oddly pristine, too pristine. He frowns, notes suspicious uniformity, and returns a month later to find nothing. The books have been misplaced. Or loaned. Or possibly destroyed in a recent fire no one recalls happening. He files a report. It's archived. Forgotten, like the others. Sometimes, the officials want to be confused, because clarity brings responsibility. Ambiguity offers safety. If the Jew says he paid, and the coin appears, then what more needs to be said? You learn their rhythms. They like tidy rows. You give them uneven ones, full of footnotes. They like clean sums. You provide fractional numbers. They ask for witness signatures. You provide them, written by your cousin's cousin, and one man who died last winter. They rarely check, and if they do? You sigh. Apologize. Mention poor eyesight or a mistake by the apprentice. They accept. They always accept. Because they don't want to admit they can't tell which parts are real. You've turned the audit into theater, and you? You're the playwright. The documents you present are dense enough to bore, thorough enough to impress, and just confusing enough to stop short of scrutiny. They leave, eventually, never with all the truth, but never quite knowing what they missed, and as their cart rolls away, you return the ledger to its shelf, not the real one, of course, and begin preparing for the next guest, because the game doesn't end, it just resets. You no longer ask if you must hide, you ask how, because concealment has stopped being just a tactic. It has become the texture of daily life. It wraps around you like your cloak. You wear it without thinking. Not all hiding involves ledgers or false names. Some of it is in the way you stir your stew. Some of it lives in your lullabies. What began as evasion becomes something deeper, identity. Your food doesn't just nourish, it signals. In cities where laws restrict Jews from using Gentile ovens, you build private hearths, tuck them behind walls, bake before dawn. You slice onions in silence. You use only oils that don't betray you with scent. You know exactly how long to boil an egg so that it looks like the Christian neighbors, but contains no trace of pork grease or impurity. Your clothing shifts too. Once, your forebears wore distinct garments, visible tassels, prayer shawls in open view. Now, your fringes are tucked in, your colors muted. Your hat, mandated by the authorities, becomes a clever marker, tilted one way in friendly towns, another where danger lurks. Even your accent is trained, Yiddish, a blending of German roots and Hebrew soul, flows like poetry when among your own, but you soften it around strangers, you bend your vowels, you mimic the Lord's. When you must, because mimicry, too, is armor, your children learn the game early, they're taught two names, one for inside, one for outside, they learn which neighbors may be trusted and which may report a Sabbath lamp left burning too long. A 5-year-old girl learns to answer to Maria at the market and Miriam at home, her voice instinctively adjusting to the air around her. The stories you tell at bedtime carry layered meanings. A fox outwits a bear, but it's not a fable, it's a metaphor for last week's market skirmish. A prince hides among shepherds, it's a tale lifted from Torah but disguised, softened, so that little ears can hear it without fear. Even lullabies are encrypted, soft melodies carry coded blessings. One might seem like a cradle song, but in it is a hidden genealogy, a whispered prayer for Jerusalem, a warning to keep quiet when strangers knock, and the language, your precious Hebrew, goes underground. Publicly, you use Latin or German. Privately, you recite verses in candlelight. Your boys study Torah behind false walls, under the guise of arithmetic. Your girls learn more than weaving and herb lore, they learn how to read faces, how to store secrets in silence. It's not just what you say, it's what you don't say. When soldiers come through, your village goes quiet. No one remembers who owns the goats. No one can find the tax receipts, even the children shrug and say, the rabbi knows, but he's gone. Sometimes, concealment is not quiet at all, you perform it. A wedding becomes a riddle, half public joy, half veiled ritual. You march in daylight, smile for the watchers. Drink wine, but the blessings whispered beneath the chuppah are spoken in a dialect no outsider follows. A funeral, too, is coded, the procession follows local law, but the mourning follows ancient rhythm. You bury your dead before sundown, whisper psalms under your breath, press tiny stones into the grave instead of flowers. The priest may think it quaint, he doesn't need to know the meanings behind the motions. And music, music may be your finest disguise, a wandering klezmer plays. For dukes and counts, his violin quick and playful, his songs harmless, until night falls. Then, the same tunes change tempo, become sacred, become stories. A single note might mark the death of a loved one, or the survival of a cousin lost in last year's raids. This is what your life has become, a code layered over a code, truth veiled in culture, faith embedded in rhythm. Some outsiders laugh, call you superstitious. Why won't Jews eat with us? Why won't they marry our daughters? Why do they whisper when they pray? But you know it's not rejection, it's not superiority, it's defense. Defense against surveillance, against scrutiny, against history's teeth, because your people have been too visible before, and visibility brings torches. So now you fade just slightly, you step sideways through the world, you smile without answering, and in that silence, you thrive. Your concealment becomes inheritance. You teach it the way others teach hunting, farming, the family business, not with paranoia, but with precision. A mother shows her daughter how to bake bread that smells Gentile. A father teaches his son which herbs mask the scent of ritual baths. A grandmother hums songs that contain entire psalms hidden between the notes. Even your humor is coded. You laugh at officials while nodding in agreement. You make jokes that mean one thing if heard aloud, and another if you know which names are real. You build a culture within a culture, a world within a world, and in doing so, you don't just dodge taxes, you preserve something, a memory, a lineage, a soul that refuses to be listed in a ledger. This is not just survival, it's resistance. Resistance in soup pots, in lullabies, in the precise way you fold a prayer shawl so that no one sees it in the basket. They may take your names, your books, your coin, but the part of you they cannot tax, the part they cannot audit, is already hidden. The wall is not just stone, it's a sentence. It says, stay here. Be seen. But don't come closer. At first, you think the ghetto might offer safety. A defined boundary. A place where no one will harass your daughter for braiding her hair the old way. A place where prayers don't echo back as suspicion, and in a way, it does offer safety, because outside the walls, danger is constant and public. Inside, it's more complicated. You are sheltered, yes, but not free. You live under curfews, under rules that shift with every new ruler's whim, no synagogue without a special license, no expansion of homes without a bribe, no public celebration without risk. They say you are free to live here. But it's more accurate to say you are permitted to stay, until further notice. The wall watches everything. It watches the butcher carry meat wrapped in cloth. It watches your neighbor smudge soot over her child's fair hair before market day. It watches you light candles on Friday night, shutters closed, hearts tight. You learn to measure joy in whispers. Weddings are small. Laughter is quick. Even births are met with both blessing and fear. Because each new life is a new name for the ledger, a new target for the taxman, or the conscriptor, or worse, still, you build, you create a life within the lines. Your street is narrow, but it is alive. Vendors hawk boiled eggs. Old men mutter over scripture, and children dart between puddles while rehearsing Talmudic riddles. Space is short, so you build upward, homes stacked like puzzle pieces, stairs so steep you could mistake them for ladders. You don't have gardens, but you grow things in windowsills. You raise chickens in crates tied to balconies. You pass thyme and basil between apartments in baskets on ropes. And in this compression, something blooms. Cohesion. What you lack in land, you gain in memory. Everyone remembers your aunt's wedding, because everyone was there. Everyone knows who borrowed whose pot. Everyone knows who needs help and who hides it well. And behind those walls, so thin, you can hear your neighbor's cough. Knowledge moves quickly. When a tax official is spotted, word travels house to house. You adjust the ledgers. You move coins from one jar to another. You shift names from page to page like a game of musical chairs, always staying just ahead of the music's end. The walls, you see, create a paradox. They enclose you, but they also protect your privacy. They keep the outsiders out, and let you whisper without fear of being overheard. Sometimes, privacy is the greatest privilege. You discuss real things after dark, when even the walls seem to exhale. You debate the king's new grain tariffs, not in public squares, but at the back of the baker's shop. You argue halakhic nuance over soup, or plan migrations over chess. The ghetto becomes your town, not by choice, but by craft. You develop your own institutions, your own court, your own police, your own tax collector. Yes, him again. You solve your own disputes. You heal each other's wounds. You bury your dead under your own rights. A stranger might look in and see a prison, but to you, it is a fortress built of survival. From within the walls, you reach beyond them, quietly. Letters are sent, cousins travel, coins move hand to hand across borders, untraceable and silent. A girl in Frankfurt marries a boy from Krakow whose face she's never seen, but whose lineage is known and trusted. It's not freedom, but it's network, and networks are stronger than walls. Sometimes, you wonder what it would be like to walk freely in the market, to not be questioned when buying bread, to speak Hebrew aloud, to teach your children the Torah without fear of fines or fire. But mostly, you wonder how long this arrangement will hold, because ghettos are tolerated only as long as they are useful. One new bishop, one new fire, one rumor, and the walls can become not just borders, but traps. So, you prepare, bags always half-packed, birth records kept in code, escape routes whispered like bedtime stories, and yet, you continue to live, to celebrate, to sing. Music floats from windows. You carve blessings into doorframes. You stitch stars not of David, but of hope, into shawls passed down from grandmother to granddaughter. The world may think it has contained you, but inside these walls, you are becoming something stronger than they imagined. A people who can adapt without forgetting, who can shrink their visible footprint and expand their inner fire, who can be both invisible and unbreakable. Because no matter how high the walls are built, they cannot contain your memory, they cannot tax your ingenuity, they cannot trace every thread in the tapestry you've hidden in plain sight. This is your shelter, this is your shield. This is the world you've made, not in spite of the wall, but within it, and that, perhaps, is the cleverest defiance of all. You've crossed a sea, not just of salt water, but of time. The world has shifted. The stone ghettos and parchment tax rolls have given way to ship manifests and Ellis Island stamps. You stand now in a strange new place, America, Canada, Argentina, South Africa, where lords wear top hats and write in English, and here, you might think, the old games are over. No more hiding coins and dowries. No more rabbinic justifications for legal gymnastics, no more 3 versions of Moishi to keep. The sense is confused, but old habits die hard, and survival, after so many generations of cleverness, has become something closer to instinct. You still pack light, you still know how to vanish from one address and appear at another. You still keep multiple names, Hebrew for the synagogue, Yiddish for the kitchen, and something vaguely anglicized for the bank account. The taxman is still here, though he smiles more now, and instead of collecting on goats, he audits business receipts. But that's the thing, you have businesses now. The skills you learned in shadows have turned into thriving trades: bookkeeping, banking, diamonds, fur, medicine, law. The very mistrust that once confined your people to the edges of medieval society made you experts in managing risk, navigating ambiguity, and storing value in places no one thinks to look. You no longer lend to barons at the castle gate, you write policies. You run ledgers, you trade futures. Your children grow up learning about compound interest before they learn about baseball. Some of the same tactics persist, now cloaked in spreadsheets instead of scrolls. Family members are kept on payrolls for just the right reasons. Assets are moved across generations under the banner of gifts. Charities flourish, legally reducing taxable wealth while building community safety nets. None of it is illegal, most of it is admirable. But if your great-grandfather were here, counting coins behind his ghetto wall, he'd smile, he'd recognize the trick, hiding in plain sight, reshaping a hostile system just enough to make it livable. He'd nod at your paperwork the way he once nodded at a well-written ketubah that concealed a dowry in metaphor, and he'd laugh when you tell him how the tax code rewards depreciation, because the details may have changed, but the spirit of survival remains. In Tel Aviv, your cousin sells antiques. In Brooklyn, your niece teaches math to students who've never heard the word shtetl. In Johannesburg, your brother imports oranges under 3 different shipping companies, all legal, all clever. You keep things just scattered enough to avoid scrutiny, but just connected enough to still be family. Your calendar still follows 2 rhythms, one for the modern world, and one lunar, sacred, old. Your daughter fills out school forms that list her ethnicity as white. But she still lights Shabbat candles and whispers Hebrew into her pillow. Your son jokes that the family reunion feels like a miniature United Nations, but he still knows which cousin had a secret wedding in Vienna during the war, and which uncle kept 3 passports in his sock drawer. In a way, you're freer than you've ever been. But freedom, to you, is never taken for granted. It is counted, protected, folded into ritual and routine, because somewhere deep in your bones, you remember how a law could change overnight, how a neighbor's whisper could cost a life, how a tax collector could knock and expect a bribe, or a soul. You teach your children not to fear, but you also teach them to prepare, to keep good records, to use soft language with strangers, to know when to speak up, and when to blend in. Camouflage is no longer born of fear, but of fluency. You move between worlds with grace, from boardrooms to synagogues, from universities to kitchens where old women still mutter blessings while chopping garlic, and sometimes, in quiet moments, you tell the stories. You tell how your ancestor once registered his cattle under a neighbor's name, how a tax official came to your great-grandmother's house, and she served him tea so strong he forgot to ask for documentation. You laugh, but there's reverence in your laughter. Because these weren't just tricks, they were tools of dignity, of memory, of holding on, even when the world wanted you gone. And when your children ask, why did they do all this just to stay alive? You answer, not with bitterness, but with awe, because what a thing it is, to persist, to adapt, to carry forward the flame through every storm. What a thing it is to whisper, we are still here, into the cold silence of history. And what a thing it is to know that survival isn't just about escaping the taxman, it's about preserving joy. The joy of music in the attic, of spice-scented kitchens, of blessings murmured under breath. The joy of teaching your children how to outsmart a world that wasn't built for them, while never letting it dim their light. The story doesn't end here. The old tricks live on, not because you're hiding, but because you've learned how to be clever and visible, because invisibility was never the goal, continuity was. And in every spreadsheet, every dual-language dinner table, every child who knows the word chutzpah before they can spell their own name, you continue, you outlast, you evolve, you endure, and yes, you still outsmart the taxman. Now, let the candles go out, one by one, let the ledgers close, let the doors behind old stone walls drift shut. You've walked through centuries tonight, not as a bystander, but as someone who lived it, who knew the quiet strength it took to bend without breaking. Your hands held coins hidden in fabric, your footsteps vanished down moonlit alleys. You felt the tension in every name, every glance, every quiet trick passed from one generation to the next. But here, right now, there's no taxman at the door, no ledger to fudge, no alias to remember. There is only you, your breath, soft and even. There is the comfort of knowing that survival isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's simply staying. You've carried so much. Tonight, you get to put it down, rest in the knowledge that your people endured, not just through strategy, but through joy, through songs hummed in secret, through lullabies disguised as prayers, through children taught how to laugh in two languages. Let that strength settle in your bones now, let it sink, slow and deep, like warm tea in a cold room. You are safe, you are held in memory, wrapped in story, drifting gently toward sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams. Crescent moon.